He hurled a hardcover book so hard it split the door to 2 inches from her skull and screamed, "Get out before I make you regret walking through that door." 6 nurses had already run from this room. Claire Bennett didn't move. She looked straight at the most feared man in Blackridge, Pennsylvania, saw the infection rotting through his shoulder, heard the fever in his breathing, and said the one word that no one in that house had dared say to Vincent Moretti in 15 years. No. A poor nurse with an empty bank account, a ruined career, and an eviction notice had just refused a Mafia boss. And somehow that changed everything. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere and stayed anyway, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, follow every part until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight by the time Claire Bennett turned her car onto the private road that led to the Moretti estate. Not the kind of rain that washes things clean. The kind that just keeps coming, steady and indifferent, soaking into everything until the world smells like wet earth and old regret. Her windshield wipers were barely keeping up. One of them had been dragging on a bad hinge for 2 months. She kept meaning to fix it. She kept not having the money. The car itself was a 2009 Civic with 187,000 miles on it and a check engine light that had been glowing orange for so long she'd stopped seeing it. The back seat held a single duffel bag, 3 days of clothes, a medical reference binder, and a paperback novel she hadn't opened in weeks because her hands shook too much at night to hold the pages steady. She hadn't eaten since that morning. A gas station coffee and a pack of peanut butter crackers. She'd been rationing her last $23 until the advance on this job cleared. If the job was real, she still wasn't entirely sure it was real. The call had come through a private medical staffing agency, one of the ones that placed nurses in situations that didn't get written up anywhere, didn't go through HR departments, didn't involve paperwork with the kinds of questions that had answers Claire didn't want to give right now. The kind of agency that existed specifically because rich people with complicated problems needed medical care and didn't want hospitals involved. The client's name hadn't been given. The address had been texted 40 minutes before her arrival. The pay offered was 3 times what she would have made at the hospital per week, and the job was described simply as private nursing care, recovering male patient, indefinite duration, residential. Claire had said yes before she'd finished reading the message. She didn't have a choice. The eviction notice taped to her apartment door that morning had made the decision simple. The gates at the end of the road were black iron, 12 feet tall, and flanked by 2 men in dark coats who were very clearly not gardeners. One of them held up a hand as her headlights swept across the entrance. Claire rolled down her window. Cold rain immediately wet her arm. "Claire Bennett," she said. "I'm the nurse." The man looked at her, really looked at her, the way security people do, reading everything about a person in 3 seconds. He looked at the duffel bag on her back seat. He looked at the duffel bag on her back seat. He looked at the check engine light. He looked at her face. Whatever he saw, it was apparently acceptable. He nodded once, and the gate swung open without a word. The driveway was long enough that she couldn't see the house from the road. When it finally came into view, Claire's first thought was that it looked less like someone's home and more like somewhere people brought things they didn't want found. No decorative lighting, no flowers by the entrance. Every window on the ground floor was shuttered or dark, except for one, a faint, sickly glow on the upper right side of the building, the kind of light that comes from a room where someone is trying to stay awake and failing. She parked, turned off the engine, sat for exactly 8 seconds with her hands on the wheel, talking herself out of the very reasonable fear that was beginning to climb her spine. "You've worked the trauma bay on a Friday night," she told herself. "You've held a man's chest open with your bare hands, waiting for a surgeon who was 3 minutes out. You have done things that would have broken other people completely. You can walk into a house." She got out of the car. The man who met her at the front door was not a guard. He was something more than a guard, something harder to name. His posture was military straight, his face was unreadable, and his eyes carried the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time calculating threats and had gotten very good at it. "Grant Mercer," he said. He didn't offer a hand. "Run security for this property." "Claire Bennett. I'm the nurse. I know who you are." He stepped aside and let her in. The door closed behind her with a sound like a bank vault. "Before you go upstairs, there are 3 things you need to understand about this house." He said it the way people say things when they've said them before and are tired of having to say them again. "First, you do not ask about the nature of his injury. You treat what's in front of you. The history of how it happened is not your business. and you will not make it your business. Claire said nothing. She'd already anticipated this. Second, you do not challenge him. His decisions about his own body are his decisions. Your job is to present options and follow instructions. She kept her face neutral. She was already composing her response to this one. Third, when he gives you a direct order, you follow it immediately. No delays, no negotiations, no. What was wrong with the last 6 nurses? Claire asked. Grant stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her the way a man looks at a person who has just casually walked past a sign that says, "Do not enter." Excuse me, the last 6 nurses. The agency told me they left within 5 days. Some frightened off, one injured. I'm going to be walking into that room without knowing what I'm walking into. And that's not good medicine. So what happened? All of it. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then, to his credit, he told her. The wound was a gunshot right shoulder, near enough to the subclavian region that the initial treatment had been hasty and incomplete. The private physician who'd been brought in 3 days ago had done what he could under difficult conditions, started antibiotics, and left instructions. But Vincent Moretti had refused the full treatment protocol, refused the recommended follow-up, refused to allow blood draws or vitals checks, or anything that he experienced as weakness made visible. The infection was spreading. The first nurse had lasted 11 hours before Vincent threw her out of the room for asking if he was in pain. The second had left voluntarily at 3 in the morning after he'd spent 45 minutes on a phone call that she later described as the most frightening thing she'd ever overheard. The third had stayed 2 days, which was the longest until now. The fourth had been hurt a coffee mug thrown at the wall behind her while Vincent was in the grip of a fever hallucination, and a shard had caught her cheek, 3 stitches. She'd called the agency from the driveway. The fifth and sixth had barely made it to the bedroom door. Claire listened to all of this. She nodded at appropriate intervals. She was cataloging symptoms in her mind while Grant spoke the fever, the delirium, the volatility, the refusal of treatment, and building a clinical picture that was significantly more serious than the agency's description had suggested. He's septic, she said when Grant finished. The doctor didn't. I know what the doctor said. I'm telling you what the picture is. When did he last eat? Yesterday. He threw the tray. When did he last drink anything? He's been refusing the IV. The doctor, is the IV still in? He pulled it out. Okay. Claire adjusted the strap of her duffel bag on her shoulder. Where's the bedroom? Miss Bennett. Grant's voice had changed slightly, just enough. With respect. You seem like a competent person. And this job is dangerous. She met his eyes. I still need to know which way to go. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he pointed toward the stairs. The second floor of the Moretti estate was quieter than the first. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. That's actually pressure. The absence of sound pressed so firmly against the air, it becomes its own kind of weight. There was a guard at the far end of the hallway. There was another one near the stairs. Both of them watched her walk without expression. The master bedroom door was closed. Claire knocked twice. Get out. The voice from inside was rough and low. The voice of a man who hadn't been sleeping and was running on something that wasn't strength anymore, just refusal. She opened the door. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn so completely that not even the gray light of the rain came through. The only illumination was from a lamp on the opposite side of the bed, with the shade tilted away from the bed. Even that much light, apparently, had been too much at some point. She could see him. Barely. Vincent Moretti was 41 years old. In photographs, and she had looked at exactly 0 photographs on purpose. Not wanting preconceptions, she imagined he looked like what he was. A man who commanded rooms, who carried the weight of authority in his posture and the expectation of obedience in his expression. What she saw now was a man who was losing a fight he didn't understand he was losing. He was in bed, but not resting, more like anchored there against his will, propped against pillows, one arm held rigidly at his side, his face carrying the particular grayness of a body that's been diverting everything it has to fighting an infection. He was sweating. His jaw was set like something that had been clenched for 3 days and forgotten how to stop. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they've already decided to reject. I said, get out, he repeated. I heard you, Claire said. She set her duffel bag on the chair by the door, unzipped it, and started pulling out what she needed. Do you know who I am? I know who you are. Then you know that when I tell someone to leave my house, I'll leave if that's what you want, Claire said, and her voice was so matter-of-fact, so completely absent of the fear he was clearly used to inspiring, that he stopped talking. But I want to be honest with you before I go, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort right now. The infection in your shoulder is spreading. If it reaches your bloodstream in significant concentration, and based on what I'm seeing from across the room, that process already started, you're looking at septic shock within the next 48 hours, maybe less. And the particular kind of septic shock you're heading toward, in a man your age without ongoing treatment and proper monitoring, has a mortality rate somewhere between 40 and 60%, even with a hospital. She let that sit in the room for exactly 3 seconds. Without one, she said, the math is worse. Vincent said nothing. She walked to the window and opened the curtains. He made a sound sharp, involuntary, the kind that comes out when someone does the thing you didn't think they would actually do, and shielded his eyes from the pale gray daylight that was suddenly everywhere. He stopped, recalibrated. When he lowered his arm and looked at her, something had shifted in his expression. She'd surprised him. That clearly didn't happen often. You're not going to last the day. Maybe not. Claire came to the foot of the bed close enough to see him properly now, but not close enough to trigger the instinct she suspected lived very close to the surface in him. I need to look at the wound. I won't touch you without your permission, but I need to see it. You don't give orders in my house. I'm not giving an order. I'm telling you what I need to do my job, a pause, which is at the moment keeping you alive. You can tell me no. I'll respect it. But then I go, and you deal with the 48 hours on your own. He watched her. His eyes were sharp, fever bright, but sharp. He was in pain. She could see exactly where the pain lived, in the set of his shoulder, the tension along his jaw, the way his left hand gripped the sheet as if letting go would cost him something. 5 minutes, he said. That's what you get. Claire moved to the side of the bed. She didn't ask for permission again. She simply did what she'd been trained to do, and she did it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent 8 years in emergency medicine and knew that calm competence was the most powerful thing she could carry into a room. She assessed him from 3 feet away, first color, breathing, visible swelling, the way his chest moved. Then, when she reached for the bandage, she warned him first, I'm going to look at the dressing now. It may pull. He didn't respond. She took that as permission. What she found under the bandage made her keep her face carefully still. The wound itself was not the worst she'd seen, but the infection spreading from it was advancing faster than it should have been. For 3 days post-injury, and the edges of the wound had a coloration and warmth that told her the antibiotic prescribed hadn't been adequate for the presentation. She replaced the dressing with clean materials from her bag, working quickly and competently, not asking for anything, just doing it, and then she stepped back and looked at him directly. You need a hospital, she said. No, I'm not arguing with you about why. I'm just telling you what's medically true, and I'm telling you it's not an option. His voice had not changed, still that low, deliberate roughness. So unless you have something useful to say if you lose consciousness, your men will have to call for emergency services. They won't have a choice, and you'll have no say in what happens after that. Claire paused. But that's not the part that bothers me most. Something flickered in his expression. Then what does? The part where you're sitting here pretending that refusing treatment is strength. She held his gaze steady. It's not. It's just a slower kind of dying. The room went very quiet. Vincent Moretti stared at her. And for one long, strange moment, something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name, not anger. Not the threat she'd been braced for, but something older and more private than either. Then his hand shot out and closed around her wrist. His grip was very strong. She felt the pressure of it travel all the way up her arm. Do you know what happens, he said very quietly, to people who speak to me the way you just did? Claire did not pull her arm back. She did not look away. I'm going to guess, she said, that most of them were afraid of you. And I understand that. But I need you to understand something too. She held her wrist very still in his grip. If you hurt me, I'll leave. And I mean that. I'll leave, and the next person they send, if anyone comes, won't be better than me. They'll just be more frightened. And frightened people make bad decisions. He looked at her wrist, at his own hand, at her face. He let go. Claire exhaled slowly, silently, where he couldn't see it cost her anything. Here is what I can do, she said, and her voice was steady as ground. I can clean and treat the wound properly. I can adjust the antibiotic protocol and get something started that actually matches your presentation. I can monitor you through the night and track the infection. And if your condition worsens in a way that is beyond my scope, I will tell you honestly, and we can decide together what happens next. She paused. But I will not stay if I am ordered to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. I won't do that, not for money, not for anyone. Vincent said nothing for a very long time. The rain continued against the windows. somewhere downstairs. Something heavy shifted, a guard changing position, a door closing in a room far enough away that the sound was just texture, just the background noise of a house that never fully slept. "What's wrong with the antibiotic?" he finally said. Not a question exactly. More like a man who had decided conditionally to be curious. "It's a good first-choice drug," Claire said. "But based on the wound's presentation and the rate of spread, I think you're dealing with something that needs broader coverage. I'd want a culture to be certain, but given that we don't have a lab, I'd want to start a second agent and reassess in 24 hours. The doctor didn't. The doctor treated what he could see and had what he had available. I'm not criticizing him. Medicine in a controlled environment is different from medicine in the field, and this is the field." She paused. "Do you have the prescriptions he left?" Grant had them. He appeared in the doorway as if he'd been standing just outside it, which Claire realized he probably had been. She reviewed the medications, confirmed what she'd suspected, wrote out a request for 2 additions on the pad she always carried, handed it to Grant, and turned back to Vincent. "I need you to drink something," she said. "Water, electrolytes if you have them, broth. Your body is working extremely hard right now and it needs resources." She paused. "I know you've been refusing. I'm asking you to stop refusing." Vincent looked at her with an expression that suggested no one had framed a request to him quite that way in a long time. "And if I don't, then the infection continues to drain you faster than your body can compensate, and we're back to the math I mentioned earlier." He was quiet. His left hand moved slightly against the sheet. "Bring water." Grant disappeared. Claire turned to begin properly organizing the supplies she'd brought. "Bennett," Vincent said. She looked back. His face was still hard. Still the face of a man who had built his entire existence around the practice of never appearing vulnerable. But there was something in his eyes that she recognized, because she'd seen it in the trauma bay more than once. The particular look of someone who has just had a very close encounter with their own mortality and is processing what that actually means. "If you're going to be in this room," he said, "you keep your opinions about how I run things to yourself." "That's reasonable," Claire said. "As long as you don't ask me to say something false, I can respect that. And you follow my instructions." "Medical instructions, yes. Safety instructions, within reason." She met his eyes. "Instructions that require me to do something harmful?" "No." He stared at her. "I've never negotiated with a nurse before," he said. "Most nurses probably couldn't afford to negotiate with you," she said. "I don't have that option. So I have to be honest instead." Grant returned with water. Vincent drank half the glass slowly, deliberately, as if making it clear that this was his decision and no one else's, and set it down. "You have until sunrise," he told her. Claire looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:47 in the morning. "That's enough time," she said. She worked through the night. Not quietly, there was nothing quiet about what needed to happen. She changed the dressing twice. She started the adjusted medication protocol once Grant confirmed the pharmacy contact had what she needed and sent it by courier. She took his temperature every 90 minutes and logged it in her notebook with the date and time and her assessment at each reading. She made him drink 3 more glasses of water over the course of 5 hours, each one a minor separate negotiation conducted in the low, careful tones of 2 people who have established a temporary ceasefire and are testing its edges. He didn't sleep. She didn't expect him to. Men like Vincent Moretti, men who had built their safety entirely from their ability to control their environment, didn't sleep well when they were injured, and someone they didn't know was sitting 6 feet from the bed, taking their pulse. Instead, he watched her. She could feel it, the weight of his attention, even when she was turned away. He was assessing her the same way she was assessing him, cataloging, measuring, deciding what to do with the information. Around 5 in the morning, he said, "Why did you lose your license?" "I didn't lose my license," Claire said without looking up from her notebook. "I was dismissed from my hospital position." "For what?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said a patient came in, 16 years old. Car accident, collapsed lung. The attending physician was in the trauma bay, but he wasn't functioning. He froze. "It happens. It happens to experienced people sometimes, and it happened to him that night. And the patient had maybe 4 minutes before that window closed. So I made a decision." "What decision?" "A needle decompression and chest tube placement, both of which were within my technical skills set, but neither of which were within what the hospital's definition of my role permitted." Vincent said nothing. "The patient survived," Claire continued. "Went home 10 days later, and 2 months after that, I received a formal dismissal notice and a letter from the hospital's legal team explaining that my actions had created significant liability and that my characterization of events differed substantially from the attending physician's account. She paused. The attending physician said I panicked and acted outside my scope. The hospital agreed with him because agreeing with me would have meant explaining why a patient nearly died because a senior physician froze, and they didn't want to explain that. She closed her notebook, so I was blacklisted. And then I was sued. And then my savings were gone. And then the debt was larger than the savings had been. And then I was here. The room was quiet. The rain against the windows had softened slightly, not stopped, just reduced to something that was almost gentle. In my world, Vincent said, and his voice had changed just slightly, just enough. Competence matters more than title. I know, Claire said. I've heard that about your world. You say it like it's a criticism. I say it like it's a difference. She looked at him. You protect your organization by making sure the most capable person is in the most critical role. I understand that. But the people in my world who needed protecting were patients who couldn't protect themselves. A 16-year-old with a collapsed lung at 4 in the morning doesn't get a vote in whether the system works. Vincent was watching her. He survived, he said finally. He did, and the doctor. Still practicing, Claire said, at the same hospital, with a different version of what happened that night in his personnel file. Something tightened in Vincent's expression, not sympathy. Exactly. Something harder and older than sympathy. Recognition, maybe. The particular response of someone who understands very well what it looks like when an institution protects itself by destroying the person who made it uncomfortable. How much does it cost you, to be honest? He asked. She didn't hesitate. Everything, apparently. He made a sound that might, in a different man, have been a short, reluctant laugh. In Vincent Moretti, it came out as something quieter, a breath, expelled through his nose, carrying just enough warmth in it to let her know that something she'd said had landed somewhere real. You should have lied, he said. Told them what they wanted to hear. I know, she said. I'm a very slow learner. And then something strange happened. Vincent Moretti. In the hour just before the rain finally began to ease, and the first gray light of actual dawn started pressing at the curtains that Claire had opened 7 hours ago, and he had not asked her to close, Vincent Moretti stopped performing. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't say anything remarkable. He didn't break down or confess or surrender in any way that could be pointed to afterward as the moment when the feared boss of the Moretti organization became something different. He just stopped holding so hard. His left hand released the sheet, his jaw unclenched degree by careful degree. He shifted slightly in the bed, not much, just the adjustment of a man who has finally given himself permission to be in the position that hurts slightly less rather than the position that looks stronger. He was still Vincent Moretti. He would be, she understood, for a very long time, maybe always. But he was also just a man who'd been shot and infected and running a fever for 3 days, trying to remain terrifying while his body slowly ran out of things to be terrifying with. Claire checked his temperature at 6:15. It was down a full degree. She wrote it in her notebook with the time and said nothing about what it meant. She had learned in 8 years of working with patients who were frightened and in pain and struggling to hold on to their sense of control that the most important things you could say were often the things you kept to yourself and let the body announce in its own time. At 6:47, Vincent said, "Your name, what was it?" "Claire Bennett." He was quiet for a moment. "You won't survive the week," he said. And this time there was something different in the way he said it, not a threat, exactly. More like a warning issued by someone who understood the specific geography of the danger better than she did and was against what were probably his better instincts, using that understanding to try to prepare her. Claire looked at the numbers in her notebook. Temperature down, pulse steadying, the color of his skin still wrong, but less wrong than it had been at 4 in the morning. She sat back in the chair, pulled her knees up slightly, not professional, but she'd been awake for 22 hours, and her spine was registering its objections, and looked at him. "Then you'd better recover quickly," she said. And Vincent Moretti, for the first time in longer than he could easily remember, closed his eyes. Not because he trusted her, not because he'd decided anything, but because his body was winning the argument that his pride had been losing for 3 days, and because somewhere in the back of his mind, below the threat assessments and the power calculations and all the elaborate machinery that kept a man like him alive and feared and in control, somewhere below all of that, something had shifted. She had not been afraid of him, and she had stayed anyway. He didn't know yet what to do with that, but he filed it somewhere real, somewhere deeper than strategy. In the part of himself where the things that actually mattered had always lived, quiet and carefully hidden, waiting for someone to speak to them directly. Outside, the rain began finally to slow. The curtains stayed open, and Claire Bennett sat in the chair beside the bed of the most dangerous man in Blackridge, Pennsylvania, with her notebook in her lap and her nearly empty bank account and her ruined reputation, and she watched the gray dawn arrive, and she did not leave. He slept 4 hours. Claire knew because she counted them. She hadn't slept at all. She'd sat in the chair with her notebook and her pen, and the particular focused stillness that emergency nurses develop after enough years of night shifts the ability to remain alert without appearing alert, to look like someone resting while every sense is actually calibrated and running. When Vincent woke at 10:47 in the morning, the first thing he did was look at her. Not in surprise, exactly more like a man checking to confirm a thing he'd expected not to be true. She was still there. He said nothing about it. Temperature, he said instead. Down another half degree from the 6:15 reading. Still elevated, but the trend is good. She stood, moved to the bedside, and held out the thermometer. Open. He looked at the thermometer, then at her. The expression on his face said very clearly that no one had told him to open his mouth since he was approximately 7 years old. He opened his mouth. She took the reading, wrote it in her notebook, and said, "You need to eat something." "I'm not hungry." "That's the infection talking. Your body needs fuel." She turned toward the door. "I'll have Grant bring something. Broth, nothing heavy." "Don't argue with me about this, Bennett." She stopped. "You're giving orders again." "I'm making recommendations," she said, without turning around. "You can decline them. I'll just write it in the notes." "What notes?" "Who are those notes for?" "Me." She looked back at him. "I keep records of every patient I treat. Observations, decisions made, decisions refused. It's how I practice medicine responsibly, in my house. Anywhere else is gaze. It's not a threat. It's just how I do things. If you want me to stop, I'll stop, and you can find a nurse who doesn't keep notes, and she'll probably give you better odds of dying." "Bring the broth," he said. She did. He drank it slowly, watching her while she reorganized her supplies with the methodical efficiency of someone who has learned that a well-ordered kit is the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic one. He watched her the way a man watches something he's trying to understand and hasn't managed to categorize yet. "How old are you?" he asked. "You act older. Emergency medicine does that." She capped a bottle of antiseptic and set it in its place. "How long have you been running this organization?" The question landed in the room like something unexpected. She felt the shift in his attention, the sharpening, the slight recalibration. "That falls under things you don't ask about," he said. "You asked me a personal question. I asked you one back." She glanced at him. "We don't have to answer each other. I'm comfortable with silence." He was quiet for a moment. "Then 15 years. She nodded, did not follow up. Let him decide what to do with the fact that she'd asked, and he'd answered. "You're not what they described," he said. "What did they describe?" "Someone desperate enough to tolerate anything." Claire set down what she was holding and looked at him directly. "I am desperate," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that because I think honesty is more useful than pretending. I needed this job badly enough to drive 2 hours in the rain in a car that might not have made it back." She paused. "But desperate doesn't mean compliant. Those are two different things." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. "In my experience," he said slowly, "everyone has a price. Desperation just determines how quickly you find it." "I've met people who believed that," she said. "They were usually very lonely. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Not a standoff. Something closer to two people simultaneously realizing they've stepped onto the same unfamiliar ground and are both uncertain what to do about it." Then Grant knocked. He came in with the particular bearing of someone carrying news he doesn't want to deliver, which Claire had already learned was Grant's default mode when something had gone wrong. She'd known him less than 12 hours, and she could already read him like a simple chart. "We have a situation," Grant said. Vincent's entire demeanor changed in the half-second between Grant's knock and Grant's words. Whatever had been present in the room, that tentative, careful human quality that had started to surface in the last hour, locked away so completely it might never have existed. "Doyle," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. He called the front gate. "Says he needs to meet today. Raymond Doyle." The name meant nothing to Claire at that moment. In 3 days, it would mean everything. "Tell him tomorrow," Vincent said. He said he's already en route. "He'll be here in 40 minutes. The temperature in the room dropped without any change in actual temperature. It was entirely Vincent the way the air around him reorganized itself when he made the shift from recovering patient to something else entirely. Then he meets with me in 40 minutes, Vincent said, and he was already moving to push himself upright. Claire stepped forward without thinking. Absolutely not. Both men looked at her. She kept her voice even. You have an active infection. Your fever is still elevated. Any significant physical or psychological stress right now is going to spike your inflammatory response and potentially push you backward by 2 days. You cannot have a high-pressure business meeting in this condition. He's one of my captains, Vincent said, in the tone of a man explaining something to someone he expects not to understand it. If I cancel, I'm not saying cancel. I'm saying she stopped, reorganized. 5 minutes, controlled conditions. I stay present. And the moment I say the meeting is over, it's over. Vincent stared at her. You're negotiating my business operations, he said. I'm negotiating your medical treatment. The business is your problem. She met his eyes. You told me you'd try. That's what we agreed, try. Grant made a sound that was not quite a cough and not quite a laugh. Vincent shot him a look that could have stopped traffic. Fine, Vincent said. 5 minutes, you stay back. You don't speak, agreed. And Bennett, his voice dropped slightly. When Doyle is in this room, nothing you see or hear leaves this room. That is non-negotiable. She thought about what she wanted to say to that. She thought about her medical ethics obligations, about the conditions under which a clinician's confidentiality was and was not absolute, about the 17 things she could have said. I understand, she said. It was the most careful 2 words she'd spoken since she arrived. 38 minutes later, Raymond Doyle walked into Vincent Moretti's bedroom. He was a compact man, late 40s, with the kind of face that had been arranged by years of careful watchfulness into something almost neutral. He looked at Vincent in the bed, and his expression went through several rapid adjustments before settling on concern. Claire didn't trust a single one of them. She stood near the window out of the way, as she'd agreed and watched. Boss, Doyle said, you look like hell. I've heard, Vincent said, and his voice had done something remarkable. The rough exhaustion of the last 8 hours was gone, or not gone, submerged, buried under exactly the register and cadence of a man in full command of his circumstances. Sit down, Raymond. Doyle sat. Claire watched the assessment he was doing, quick, practiced eyes moving over the room, registering the medical supplies, registering her, registering the position of Grant near the door, reading the tableau. There's talk, Doyle said. I want you to hear it from me directly before you hear it from someone who's going to give it a spin. What kind of talk? That the situation is worse than we've been letting on. That you're not in a position to manage what's coming. That there are people asking questions about the Westfield arrangement and wondering who's going to answer them. He paused. And there are people positioning themselves. I won't say who. Not yet, but you should know. Vincent said nothing for a moment. He was very still. Claire could see, from where she stood, the slight increase in the tension along his jaw, the micro-expression of a man managing pain while performing the absence of it. The Westfield arrangement will be managed, Vincent said. Anyone who's positioning themselves should know that recovery doesn't mean vacancy. And anyone who's been talking to outside parties about our internal situation will find that I'm paying very close attention to which names keep appearing. Doyle nodded. There was something in his face that Claire couldn't read. Not quite relief, not quite retreat. Something that sat between the two. I thought so, Doyle said. Just wanted to hear it directly. And now you have. Vincent let a pause settle. That was 4 minutes, Raymond. You should go. Doyle stood. He looked at Vincent for 1 moment longer than felt neutral, and then he nodded, adjusted his jacket, and walked out. Grant followed him without being asked. The moment the door closed, Vincent's body did something it had been refusing to do for the entire 5 minutes of that meeting. It sagged. Not dramatically, not a collapse, not a cry. Just the invisible structure that had been holding everything in place for the duration of Raymond Doyle's visit left the room along with the man himself. And what remained was a man who was running on insufficient reserve and had just spent all of them in one 4-minute performance. Claire was at the bedside before he had to ask. Lie back, she said. I don't need lie back, Vincent. He did. And for the second time in 12 hours, she was close enough to see his face without the armor of audience. And for the second time, she found it harder to look at than the mask had been. He was exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix quickly. He was frightened in a way that he probably hadn't admitted to himself. And he was holding the weight of something she was beginning to understand was genuinely enormous. Not just an organization, not just money, but the specific burden of being the thing that everything else depends on, and knowing that if you bend, the whole structure bends with you. Your pulse is elevated, she said, 2 fingers at his wrist. What he said, are you all right? I'm fine. I'm asking medically, and I'm answering. He looked at the ceiling. It was a routine conversation. It wasn't, she said. I could see your jaw from across the room. He turned his head and looked at her. The look said, do you understand what you're doing right now? She held it. She did understand. She was doing it anyway. He was here to take inventory, she said quietly, to see how bad the damage was. You don't know what you're talking about. I know what that kind of visit looks like. I've been at enough bedsides when someone was measuring how much time was left. She paused. The person who shot you. Do you know who sent them? The room went absolutely still. Bennett, he said, and his voice was different now, not threatening but very serious. The way a voice gets when the warning it's carrying is genuine. Do not ask it again, she said. She meant it. She filed what she needed to file, let the rest go, and turned back to his vitals. She didn't know yet how soon she would learn the answer anyway. That afternoon, while Vincent rested, and Grant ran the perimeter check that he apparently ran every 6 hours, Claire found herself in the kitchen making tea. There was no nurse's station, no break room, just the large, formal kitchen on the ground floor that felt strange to use, but was the only place with a kettle. One of the household staff was there, a woman in her 60s who introduced herself only as Ina, who moved around the kitchen with the quiet, practiced invisibility of someone who had been keeping a house for a very long time and had learned to need very little acknowledgement for it. Ina set a plate of toast on the counter near Claire without being asked. You should eat, Ina said. Claire looked at the toast. Her stomach responded before she could formulate a polite decline. Thank you, she said. They didn't talk much. But at some point, while Claire was eating her second piece of toast and staring at the middle distance, Ina said, not looking at her, just working. He paid for my daughter's cancer treatment 3 years ago. She's in remission now. Claire looked up. He didn't tell her, Ina said. He had the billing adjusted through a different account. She still thinks it was the hospital's financial assistance program. Ina was quiet for a moment, still not looking at Claire. I don't know what he is, I'm not stupid. But I know what he did. Claire sat with that for a long time after Ina left the kitchen. That evening, she found something she hadn't been looking for. She'd been organizing the medication schedule on the small table outside Vincent's room, timing, dosages, interaction concerns she wanted to flag to the private physician when he returned for his follow-up when she needed a piece of tape from the drawer in the hallway credenza. The drawer was mostly office supplies, but in the back, pushed behind a stapler and a box of pens, was a spiral-bound notebook with no label. It fell open when she moved the stapler. She wasn't trying to read it, but the page it fell open to stopped her. It was a list, handwritten, in a neat but clearly personal script, a column of names on the left, and next to each name, figures, dollar amounts, dates, the kind of record that wasn't kept for business purposes. It was too personal for that, too irregular in its entries, each one with a small notation next to it that didn't look like accounting. Martinez family, 3 children, ages 9, 11, 14. Monthly, Caro widow of D. Caro driver. Quarterly, Hendrick schooling, 2 years remaining. Monthly. She stood there for longer than she should have. Then she closed the notebook, put the stapler back on top of it, took her tape, and went back to the medication schedule. She didn't say anything to Vincent about it. She didn't intend to. But it stayed with her the way things stay with you when they complicate the simpler story you've been telling yourself. The second twist came at 11 at night. She was reviewing the evening vitals trending better, which was the most genuinely encouraging set of numbers she'd seen since arrival when Grant appeared in the doorway. Not the usual appearance. Something was off in the calibration of his stillness. Bennett, he said, do you have your keys? My car keys? Yes, your apartment keys. She looked at him. Why would you need my apartment keys? I don't, he said. I'm asking if you have them on you. Your landlord, he stopped. Vincent made a call this afternoon. Everything went quiet inside her. What kind of call, she said. Grant told her. Claire sat very still while he explained that her eviction had been indefinitely suspended, that her belongings, which had apparently been in the process of being moved to building storage when the call came, had been returned to her apartment, that the outstanding rent balance had been resolved through what was described to her landlord as an advance payment from a private employer. She listened to all of it. Then she stood up, walked to the bedroom door, opened it without knocking, and said, Vincent. He opened his eyes. He'd been half asleep. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him more alert very quickly. You called my landlord, she said. Your lease was going to be terminated in. You called my landlord, she repeated, without asking me, without telling me. You made a financial decision about my home and my life, and you didn't consider for 1 second that I might need to be consulted. You needed what I needed, Claire said, and her voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when they're being held there by considerable effort, was to handle my own situation, on my own terms, through my own choices. You were going to be homeless. That was my problem to solve. You're solving my medical problem. I solved your housing problem. His voice was reasonable in a way that suggested he genuinely did not understand why she was upset. It's equivalent. It is not equivalent. She stepped further into the room. You hired me. I am providing a service for payment. That is a transaction we agreed to. What you did tonight was not a transaction. It was a demonstration. Something moved behind his eyes. Of what? Of the fact that you could. She held his gaze. You did it because you could, and because you're used to solving problems by applying resources. And because it probably didn't occur to you that solving my problem without my knowledge was itself a problem. He was quiet. You want to be in debt to me, he said slowly, like he was working it out. I want to not be in debt to you at all. Those are different things. Then it's a payment, he said, for exceptional service, in advance. Then put it in writing, Claire said. Document it as a legitimate medical services advance, with a clear accounting of hours and rate and total amount, and my signature acknowledging receipt. He stared at her. You're making me produce a contract, he said. With you, yes. In my own house. The silence stretched. She watched him process it, the man who had spent 15 years being the person who set the terms of every arrangement, every exchange, every obligation in his world, sitting in his own bed, being asked to formalize an agreement by his nurse. Grant, he said finally. Grant appeared instantly from the hallway. Claire was beginning to suspect he was simply always there. Get a laptop, Vincent said. We're apparently drafting a contract. Grant left. Claire did not move. You're the most difficult employee I've ever had, Vincent said. You've had some very easy employees, she said. Look how that worked out. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, she wasn't sure his face knew how to make that particular arrangement of muscles anymore. But something adjacent. Something that acknowledged the hit. The contract was drafted. Claire read every line, suggested 2 revisions, one to the payment timeline, one to the termination clause, and signed it. Vincent watched the entire process with the expression of a man experiencing something completely novel and not entirely sure if he found it infuriating or interesting. Are you always like this, he asked. Like what? Like you're the one running things. Claire put the pen down. I'm not running anything. I'm protecting my position. There's a difference between control and self-protection. In my experience, there isn't. I know, she said. That's the saddest part. He didn't answer that. At 2 a.m, she noticed the first anomaly. She'd been doing a last check of the evening medications logged, supplies inventoried, the kind of end-of-shift ritual that she performed even when the shift technically had no end when something caught her attention. The security log that Grant kept on a tablet near the bedroom door. She glanced at it twice before without intention, just the nurse's habit of absorbing available information. But tonight something was different. The timestamps, specifically the gap in the camera rotation. The same 20-minute window each night, 11:40 to midnight, where the exterior rear camera showed a frozen frame. Not offline, not malfunctioning. Frozen, which meant it was on a loop. Someone was feeding a recorded image to that camera during a specific window every night. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about whether it was her business. She thought about the fact that Vincent had been shot and was now in a compromised state, and there was a man who had just visited to take inventory. She thought about Ina's daughter, about the notebook and the credenza, about the weight of someone's life she'd been handed without asking for it. She closed the security log to exactly where she'd found it and went back to her chair. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But she started paying different attention. By day 3, the infection was retreating. Not gone, not even close to gone, but retreating. And the difference in Vincent was visible in the specific way that a person's eyes change when they've turned a corner. When the body stops spending everything it has on just staying alive and starts having something left over for existing. He was still difficult. He was still commanding, still conducting business from the bed in ways that she had given up trying to control after the second conversation in which he had looked at her with the particular patience of a man waiting for the objection to finish so he could continue doing what he was going to do anyway. She had recalibrated. She picked her battles, the medical ones she held firm on, the organizational ones she observed. She was learning his world the way she'd learned the trauma bay by watching, by listening, by understanding the specific grammar of how things worked and what it meant when they deviated from pattern. On the morning of the fourth day, he asked her what she actually wanted. Not to do, not medically. He asked her what she wanted out of her life. What the point of all of it was, the nursing and the stubbornness and the very clear and consistent refusal to be handled. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the window, the curtains still open, the way she'd left them on the first night, and thought about it the way the question deserved. I want to practice medicine the way it's supposed to be practiced, she said. I want to walk into a room where someone is scared and in pain, and I want to be the thing that makes that better. Properly, not around the edges of what some administrator decided I was permitted to do. Actually, he was quiet. You want to be useful, he said. I want to be allowed to be useful. That's not the same thing. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, the woman who runs the medical staffing agency, Briggs. She told me you were the best nurse she'd placed in 3 years. She also said 3 hospitals had passed on you because of the dismissal. Claire said nothing. That's a waste, he said. It was simple and flat, and somehow it landed heavier than a longer statement would have. Yes, she said. It is. On the afternoon of the fourth day, when the vitals were finally stable enough that she allowed herself to believe the crisis had genuinely passed, Claire went through the security log again. The camera gap was there, same window, same duration, same frozen frame, and the gate code. The exterior gate log showed an access entry at 11 minutes after the camera window started, 9 minutes before it ended. Someone was coming in through the back. Someone who knew the camera schedule and had the code to the gate. She thought about the 6 nurses who had left. She thought about the timing. She thought about Raymond Doyle and the particular quality of his expression when he'd looked at Vincent in the bed and said, "You look like hell." She thought about the unopened medication package she'd noticed that afternoon resealed, but not quite right. The crease on the flap not matching the factory fold. She'd almost dismissed it. She almost had. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the chair and she watched the door. She went through everything she'd observed in 4 days, arranging it and rearranging it and looking at the shape of what it made. And she understood slowly, and then all at once, the way understanding sometimes comes, that the danger Vincent Moretti was in was not over. It hadn't even started. She almost told him on the 5th morning. She'd been awake since 3, running the same loop, the camera gap, the gate code, the resealed medication package. And by 6:15, when she took his temperature and wrote it down with the particular satisfaction of a number that was finally genuinely normal, she was 90% certain of what she was looking at. Someone inside the house was preparing for something. Not in the abstract, not in the organizational power-shifting way that Doyle's visit had suggested. Something specific, something with a timeline. But she stopped herself because she had no proof. She had observations and pattern recognition and the clinical instinct of someone trained to notice deviations before they became crises. But she did not have a single concrete thing she could put in front of Vincent Moretti and point to and say, this is the threat. And she understood, she was beginning to understand very well, that in this world, making an accusation without the substance to back it up didn't just fail at ricochet. It came back and took out the person who'd made it. So she held it. She filed it in the part of her mind where she kept the things she was still developing, and she went about the business of the morning. Vincent's temperature was 98.6. The first time since she'd arrived that it had been precisely, unremarkably, beautifully normal. She told him, he said, good. Which, she had learned by now, was Vincent Moretti's version of a standing ovation. The wound is responding well to the adjusted protocol, she said, unwrapping the dressing with the practiced efficiency she brought to everything. The redness at the margin has pulled back significantly. The tissue color is better. She paused. You're not out of the woods. But you're past the part where I was genuinely worried about losing you. She said it without thinking about how it would sound. He was quiet for a moment. Then you were worried. I'm a nurse. Being worried is most of the job. That's not what I meant. She focused on the wound. She wasn't going to look at his face right now. The dressing needs to be changed twice daily for another week minimum. After that, once daily, and we reassess based on healing progression. Bennett, what? You were worried, he said again, and this time it wasn't a question or a challenge. It was just a man naming a thing he'd noticed carefully. The way you name something you're not entirely sure you're allowed to touch. She finished the dressing. She stepped back. She looked at him. Yes, she said, I was. He held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at the window. The wound doesn't hurt as much today. which she understood by now was his version of thank you. She accepted it the same way he'd offered it quietly, without making it larger than it was. At 9:45 that morning, Grant knocked and entered with the expression he wore when something was happening that he couldn't yet fully categorize. "The car," he said to Claire. She looked up from her notes. "What about it?" "It needs a new alternator. It won't start." "The mechanic on property can leave it," Claire said. "It's already in the garage." She put down her pen. "Grant, is this another Vincent decision that I'm finding out about after the fact?" Grant had the good grace to look slightly uncomfortable. He noticed it wasn't starting this morning when one of the men checked the property. Claire looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who was absolutely not avoiding eye contact. "We are going to have a conversation," she said, "about the difference between providing fair compensation for services and assuming ownership of my problems." "It's a car repair," Vincent said to the ceiling. "It's my car." "It's a broken car, Vincent." He finally looked at her. "Consider it part of the housing advance we already documented," he said. "Add the mechanic's invoice to the contract total. You can pay it back out of the per diem whenever you want to make a point out of it." The logic was infuriating specifically because it was reasonable. "Fine," she said, "but you ask first next time." "I'll consider it." "No," he said, "it isn't." She picked up her pen. He almost smiled. She didn't see it because she was already writing, but Grant saw it from the doorway, and his expression shifted into something that in 20 years of working for Vincent Moretti, he had never expected to see on this particular man's face. It looked something like relief. By the afternoon of day 5, the household had begun to reorganize itself around Claire's presence in the way that households do when a new element has established that it belongs. The guards no longer watched her with assessment in their eyes. Ina left food outside the bedroom door at meal intervals without being asked. Even the shift changes were quieter than they'd been at the beginning, the handoffs happening with less disruption to the medical rhythm she'd established. She was becoming part of the structure. She knew it, and she knew it could be dangerous, the way things became invisible once they were integrated, the way people stopped noticing what was always there. She kept her own schedule, maintained her own records, and made sure that at least once a day she was somewhere on the property that wasn't the bedroom, seeing something that wasn't Vincent Moretti's face. It was during one of these deliberate absences late afternoon, day 5, in the small sitting room off the main hallway, where she'd taken to reviewing her notes that she found the second anomaly. The medication package had been bothering her since she'd noticed the improperly resealed flap 2 days before. She'd moved it to her own kit after that, filed it away, but hadn't gone back to it. Now she pulled it out and examined it properly under the lamp. The seal had been opened with something thin, a knife or letter opener, and then re-glued with something that wasn't the original adhesive. The factory seal used a specific bonding agent. This was slightly tackier, slightly different in texture. She'd worked with enough pharmaceutical supplies to know what an original seal felt like. She opened the package. The pills were right. The count was right. But the coating on 3 of the capsules in the lower row was slightly thicker than the others, a differential that would have been invisible to anyone not holding them up to direct light and comparing them to the surrounding capsules. Her hands went very still. She set the 3 capsules aside. She looked at them for a long time. Then she took out her phone and called the only person in her contacts who could tell her, quickly and without a lot of questions, what she was looking at. A pharmacist she'd worked with for 6 years at the hospital. She called him, kept her voice level, described what she was seeing in clinical terms without context, and asked if he had any thoughts. He had thoughts. He had very specific thoughts. He told her that the coating differential she was describing was consistent with a tampered capsule, the kind of tampering done by someone who had replaced or added to the original contents without completely disassembling the capsule, a process that left exactly the kind of coating inconsistency she was holding in her hand. She thanked him. She hung up. She sat for exactly 90 seconds. Then she stood up, walked upstairs, and knocked on Vincent's door. "Come in," he said. He was on the phone. He held up one finger, the universal gesture, for one moment, and she waited, standing just inside the door, not sitting, not moving, just waiting with the 3 capsules in her closed hand. He looked at her face and he ended the call. "What?" he said. She opened her hand. She told him what she'd found. All of it, the camera gaps she'd noticed on day 2, the gate code access during the window, the resealed package, the pharmacist's assessment of the capsules. She told him in the order she'd discovered things without editorializing, Without conclusion, just the data, clean and sequential. The way she presented case information. She said what she knew, and what she suspected and what she couldn't prove, and she made very clear which category each piece of information fell into. Vincent listened to all of it, without speaking. When she finished, the room was completely silent. Then he said, "How long have you known?" "I began noticing on day 2. I became confident enough to say something today." 2 days, he said. "I had no proof on day 2. I had a pattern. Presenting a pattern to you without proof in this house. With the way things work, I didn't think that was safe. For anyone," she held his gaze. "I needed to be sure." He looked at the 3 capsules in her palm. His expression had done the thing it did when he was processing that particular stillness. That was nothing like calm. That was actually the opposite of calm. That was every part of a very sharp mind moving very fast and keeping none of it visible. "Grant," he said. Grant was already there. "Nobody in or out," Vincent said. "Confirm the shift on the rear exterior." "Do it personally." Grant was gone before the sentence ended. Vincent looked at Claire. "Give me those." "For what purpose?" He looked at her. The look said, "Are you genuinely asking me that right now?" "I need to know what's in them," she said. "Not because I don't believe you'll handle it. Because I put those medications into your body. I need to know what you were taking." She paused. "After that, they're yours." He held her gaze. Then he said very quietly, "Have you thought about what happens if you're right?" "Yes. And I'm still sitting here," she said. "So I must have decided the answer was acceptable." Something moved through his expression, some fast and complicated, that she didn't have a name for. He reached out and took the capsules from her hand. At 2:14 in the morning, the world exploded. Not metaphorically, not gradually. One moment Claire was asleep in the chair by the door, truly asleep for the first time in days, her body finally surrendering after 120 hours of vigilance. And then there was sound, glass, a massive structural impact, and then a second one closer. She was on her feet before she was fully awake. It was a trauma bay response, the body wired to move before the mind had finished the question, and she was at the bedroom door in the same second that Grant came through it. His face told her everything before he said a word. "Breach," he said. "Lower level, south entry. It's Doyle." He gave them the gate code, and the camera loop, it was him running the window. They came in heavy. He was already moving toward Vincent. "We need to move him now." Vincent was awake. He was also already attempting to stand, which was exactly what a man with a healing gunshot wound and a week of post-infection weakness should not be doing. And he was doing it with the expression of someone who was going to stand if it killed him. "It might stop," Claire said. She was at his side in 2 steps. "You stand up fast right now, and you're going to drop. Get out of my way, Bennett. I will get out of your way as soon as you let me help you do this in a way that doesn't kill you." She got her shoulder under his left arm. "Grant," the other side. "I don't need." An impact shook the wall to the right of them. Close. Inside the house now. Downstairs or just below, the sound traveled through the floor and the walls and through the soles of Claire's shoes and up her legs. Vincent stopped arguing. They moved. Claire and Grant with Vincent between them, across the bedroom toward the walk-in closet at the far wall. And Claire had been told the safe room existed. Grant had mentioned it on day 2 in the context of emergency protocols, but she'd never seen the entrance. Grant hit a panel in the closet's back wall. It swung inward. Gunfire, distinctly closer now, a hall or 2 away. "Go," Grant said. "You're coming," Vincent said. "I'm buying you 2 minutes." Grant looked at Claire over Vincent's shoulder, and what passed between them in that half-second was not words. It was the universal language of people who are both, at the moment, responsible for the same life, and who both understand what that means. Get him through. Keep him talking. Don't let him sleep. Grant pulled the door closed behind them. The safe room was small and black, not dim black. The kind of absence of light that the eye cannot adjust it to, that presses against you like a physical thing. Claire had one hand on Vincent's back and one hand feeling for a surface, a wall, anything to anchor herself to. She found one and pressed him against it carefully. "Sit," she said. He sat. She heard it more than saw it, the shift of his weight, the controlled exhale of a man lowering himself when every part of him wants to remain standing. She felt for his wrist, pulse, still strong but elevated. Too elevated. "I need you to breathe," she said, deliberately. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. Match me. I'm not doing breathing exercises while Vincent." Her voice in the dark was the only stable thing in the room. "Match me," a beat. Then reluctantly she heard him do it. The specific sound of a person deciding against their instincts to comply. She could hear movement through the wall. Muffled impacts. Voices she couldn't resolve into words. And then for a while nothing, which was worse, Because silence in that context wasn't safety, it was just the absence of information. Tell me something, she said. What? Anything. You can tell me something true or something false. I don't need it to be important. I need you conscious, and I need your heart rate to come down. She kept 2 fingers on his pulse. Talk to me. He was quiet for a moment. My father, he said, and his voice in the dark was different from any version of it she'd heard, yet stripped of the specific weight he carried in every room, every conversation, every deliberate silence. Just a man's voice. He used to tell me that fear was the only currency that didn't devalue a pause. That love was a liability. Loyalty was conditional. But fear was compound interest. She said nothing, just listened. He meant it as wisdom, Vincent said. He genuinely believed it. A beat, he was right for a long time. It works, you build things with it. Fast. People comply, operations run, nobody tests you more than once. He stopped. And then one day you look around at everything you've built, and you realize the only thing holding any of it together is that everyone is afraid, including you. Claire pressed 2 fingers harder against his wrist. His pulse was coming down. Slowly, but coming down. What are you afraid of, she asked. The silence was long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. That it ends like this, he said finally, in a dark room. He stopped. Before anything different was possible. She heard something shift against the wall, his head, tilting back against the surface. A man looking at a ceiling he couldn't see. Is it possible, she asked? Something different. I don't know, he said. I've been running the same machine for 15 years. I don't know if the machine can run differently, or if the only option is to stop it. What would stopping it cost? Everything, he said, and everyone who depends on it. She thought about the notebook in the credenza, the Martinez family, the widow of Di Caro, the names in careful handwriting with the dollar amounts beside them. They depend on it, she said. Or they depend on you. He didn't answer. His pulse was 110 better. You're bleeding, she said. She could feel it, the warmth, against her forearm where it was pressed near his shoulder, the specific wet that didn't need light to identify. The exertion of the movement had reopened the wound. Not catastrophically, but significantly. She needed to apply pressure, and she needed to do it in absolute darkness with no kit. She used her own shirt, pressed it against the wound with both hands and held it. That's your shirt, Vincent said. I'm aware. I can reimburse. Vincent, stop talking about money and keep your blood inside your body. A sound from him. A short, involuntary one. She'd made him laugh, or the closest thing to it that the situation and the pain and 15 years of practiced severity would allow. In the dark, holding pressure on his wound with her bare hands, Claire felt something shift. Not in the room, not in the sounds coming through the wall and herself. The line she'd been maintaining since the first night. The professional boundary that kept this job a job and kept her observations clinical and kept her concerns structured and bounded. She felt it flex in a way it hadn't before. She was no longer worried about him the way you're worried about a patient. She was worried about him the way you're worried about someone who matters. She recognized it. She didn't push it away. She filed it the way she filed everything and kept her hands steady. When this door opens, she said, whatever happens, you don't protect me by making yourself a target. Do you understand? I don't agree to that. I'm not asking you to agree. I'm asking you to understand. There's a difference? Yes, she said. Understanding means you know what I'm saying. Agreement means you intend to follow it. She pressed harder against the wound. You can understand without agreeing. I do it with you every day. Another silence. This one had a different quality. Claire, he said. First time he'd used her first name. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. When we get out of here, he said, I need to know you're going to stay. Not because of the contract. Because he stopped. The stop was different from his usual pauses, not calculated, not controlling. Just a man running into the edge of something he didn't have practiced language for. I need to know the door isn't the end of this. Her hand stayed steady. Her voice stayed level. Ask me when we get out, she said. That's a real conversation. This is a crisis. I don't make commitments in crises. She paused. Ask me in the morning. He was quiet then. You think there'll be a morning? Yes, she said. Simply, flatly, with the conviction of someone who has dragged people back from worse than this and knows what survived looks like. I think there'll be a morning. The door opened at 4:47. Grant. His face in the pale emergency light of the hallway was cut in 2 places and his jacket was destroyed. Behind him, 2 of the surviving security team. Behind them, the sound of the estate coming back to itself, voices. Movement, the particular organized activity of people dealing with aftermath. It's clear, Grant said. Claire got her shoulder under Vincent's arm and they came out together. The hallway looked like something she'd seen in the trauma bay, the aftermath of violent impact, the particular damage that came from people intent on doing harm at speed. She categorized it clinically, didn't let herself feel it, just moved. Vincent was on his feet, barely, but on his feet, and moving under his own power with her steadying him, and that itself was a data point she filed as positive. They made it to the fortified medical room on the ground floor. She hadn't known it existed until Grant led them there, but it was properly stocked, genuinely equipped, and she stopped being a trauma nurse in a crisis and became a trauma nurse at work. The physician arrived within 40 minutes. Grant had called him when the breach started. Claire briefed him on the wound status, the antibiotic protocol, the overnight developments, the reopened margin, and the blood loss. And then she stepped back exactly as far as professional collaboration required her to, and not 1 inch further. She handed what was his to him. She kept what was hers. While the physician worked, and Vincent tolerated the treatment with the stoic endurance she'd spent 5 days coming to recognize as his particular form of courage, Claire sat down in the chair against the wall and looked at her hands. They were steady. She was always surprised, after years of this, that they were steady. Grant came and stood near her. Not close, just near, in the way of someone who has processed a significant night and needs to be near another person who has processed the same night. He'll want to respond, Grant said quietly. Immediately. You know what that means. I know what he'll want it to mean, Claire said. It doesn't have to mean that. Grant looked at her. You're going to tell him that, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Grant was quiet for a moment. I've watched what a retaliation cycle does to this organization, he said. What it does to the people in it. A pause. I'm tired of burying men who had families. She looked at him. She saw something she hadn't expected. Not a security chief reporting on a threat landscape, but a person who was exhausted by the cost of the world he worked in and had been exhausted for a long time. Then say that to him, she said. When he's stable, say exactly that. He doesn't listen to me that way. He might, she said. He's different than he was 5 days ago. Not completely, but enough. She looked at Vincent across the room, the physician working, Vincent enduring it, his face turned slightly away. He's been listening to things he didn't used to let in. I don't know how long that window stays open, but it's open now. Grant followed her gaze. You're staying, he said. Not a question. She thought about the dark room. The first name. Ask me in the morning. Yes, she said, I'm staying. At 6:53 in the morning, with the threat contained and the physician's work complete, and the estate reorganizing itself around the damage, Vincent looked across the room at Claire and said, it was Doyle. All of it. The camera loop was his schedule. He was meeting with the crew inside the window. The capsules were from an inside contact he'd turned. The shooting he stopped. The original shooting was his contract, not the crew that pulled the trigger. His order. Claire looked at him. He was going to let the infection finish it, she said. And if that failed, the medication. A pause. You were in that room when they came in because of me. Because you stayed. I stayed because I chose to, she said. That's what I said. No, she said quietly, it isn't. She looked at him directly. Nobody owns my choices. Not you, not Doyle. Not anyone who tried to buy me or threaten me or outlast me. A pause. I was in that room because it was where I decided to be. And in the morning when you've slept and the physician has cleared me to resume primary care, we're going to talk about what happens next. What happens next, he said, is Doyle answers for this. Yes, she said, he does. And we're going to have a very specific conversation about how. He looked at her. I already have a method in mind, he said. I know, she said, so do I. And one of them doesn't create 3 more Doyles. She stood. Get some sleep, Vincent, Claire. She stopped. This morning, he said. You said ask you in the morning. She looked at the window. Pale light, the specific color of very early morning on the other side of the worst night she'd had in years. It's morning, she said. Are you staying? She turned back and met his eyes across the room, this man who had thrown a book at her head on the first night, who had grabbed her wrist and threatened her and then released her, who had paid her landlord behind her back and let her force him into a contract and told her in the dark about his father and the currency of fear, who had said her first name like it cost him something real. I told you on the first night, she said. You'd better recover quickly. She paused. That's still the deal. And she sat back down in the chair, and the morning came in through the open window. And the estate, damaged and reorganizing and carrying the weight of the night it had survived, breathed. He slept 6 hours, the most consecutive sleep he'd had in 10 days. Claire knew because she counted them. She was still in the chair when he woke. At 12:41 in the afternoon, still there, still upright, still with her notebook in her lap and the particular focused stillness that had become, over the course of the last week, the specific gravity of this room. Vincent opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling for a moment before he looked at her. She'd noticed he always did that, oriented himself to the room before he oriented himself to the people in it. A habit of someone who had spent a long time making sure of his surroundings before he let anyone see his face in the first seconds of waking, when a person was most genuinely themselves. Then he looked at her. "You stayed," he said. "I told you I would." "People tell me things," he said. "They don't always mean them. I mean the things I say." She stood, moved to the bedside, and put 2 fingers on his wrist without asking. His pulse was steady. Strong, the number she'd been working toward for 10 days. Finally present and holding. "How's the pain?" "On a scale of 1 to 10. 3, she wrote it down. "The physician will be back at 4. He'll want to assess the reopened margin from last night." She paused. "I already told him what happened. He knows the wound was stressed. He's not going to be surprised by what he finds." Vincent was watching her the way he'd been watching her since the second day, that careful, continuous assessment of someone cataloging information they hadn't decided what to do with yet. But something in it had shifted after the safe room, after the dark and the breathing exercises, and his father and the currency of fear. After she'd pressed her shirt against his wound with her bare hands and told him to keep his blood inside his body. Some things, once said in the dark, restructure everything after them. "Claire," he said. She looked up from the notebook. "I need to talk to Grant about Doyle," he said. "I need you to be in the room." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because you said, one of the methods doesn't create 3 more Doyles." He held her gaze. "I want to hear what you meant." She studied him. She was looking for the angle, for the specific way a man like Vincent used openness as a strategy, invited someone in so they'd lower their guard, and then redirected the conversation to where he'd already decided it would go. She'd watched him do it with Grant. She'd watched him do it with Doyle, that careful afternoon meeting where every word was placed with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he wanted the other person to walk away believing. She didn't find the angle. What she found, instead, was a man who looked genuinely tired of the architecture of his own moves. "All right," she said, "but I speak freely. No filtering for the company." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." Grant came in at 1:15. He looked like someone who had caught 3 hours of sleep against a wall and was operating on professional obligation and coffee, and he carried himself with the specific quality of a man who had already made decisions in the early morning hours and was prepared to have them tested. He looked at Claire when he came in. A quick, confirming look. She registered it. The question in it, the relief when she was still there. She nodded slightly. He nodded back. "Doyle," Vincent said. "Where is he now?" Grant said. "We have eyes on it. He doesn't know we're watching. He thinks the operation last night was clean enough. He's waiting on confirmation from the crew that the job was finished." A pause. "He's not going to get it." "Good," Vincent said. "What do we have on him?" "Everything. Not just last night." Grant laid it out. It took 12 minutes, and Claire sat in her chair and listened to everything. And what she heard was not just the story of Raymond Doyle's betrayal, but the story of a man who had been systematically building an alternative structure inside Vincent's organization for at least 2 years. The embezzlement was the smallest part, a diversion of funds that looked like operational costs, and had been routed through 3 shell accounts before it landed anywhere traceable. The alliances were more significant. Doyle had made contact with 2 competing organizations and offered them information about the Moretti operations weaknesses in exchange for support when he moved to take control. And the plan to seize control had a specific timeline. Doyle had intended to be in position within 60 days. He'd accelerated it when Vincent got shot. A wound that was, Grant confirmed now, a contract that Doyle had arranged through a hired intermediary, someone with no visible connection to Doyle's people. Someone who had been paid in cash through 4 levels of insulation. Doyle had tried to kill Vincent with a bullet. When that failed, he'd tried to let the infection finish it. When Claire had interrupted that, he'd tried the medication. And when the medication had been identified before it worked, he'd gone kinetic. He'd been trying to kill this man for 3 weeks through escalating methods, and he had failed each time by a narrower and narrower margin. The room was quiet when Grant finished. "He goes to ground," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. "Or he runs," Grant said. "He knows we're going to come for him. If I were him, I'd already be moving." "He's not moving yet," Claire said. Both men looked at her. "He's waiting," she said. "You said he's waiting on confirmation from the crew. That means he still thinks the timeline is on his side. He doesn't know we're watching him. He doesn't know the crew failed completely." She paused. Right now, Raymond Doyle thinks he has time. Vincent looked at Grant. Something passed between them. She's right, Grant said, with the particular tone of a man who is accustomed to being the one who is right in these situations and is adjusting to the existence of another person who occupies the same function. So here's the window, Claire said. And here's my question. She looked at Vincent directly. What do you want to happen to Raymond Doyle? Not what you want to do to him. What do you want the outcome to be? Vincent's expression shifted slightly. The question clearly wasn't one he was used to receiving the distinction between action and outcome, between the immediate satisfaction of a response and the longer game of what it produced. I want him removed, Vincent said, permanently. From your organization? A beat. From any position to threaten this organization. Those are different things, Claire said. And one of them creates the cycle I was talking about. She leaned forward slightly. If you move on Doyle with force, his allies react. The two organizations he made contact with treat it as provocation. You respond to their provocation. The men who were loyal to Doyle and are currently uncertain about their position pick a side based on whoever looks stronger. And in 6 months you are fighting a three-front conflict built on the bones of this one. She paused. I've seen this pattern. Not in your world in the hospital. An administrator retaliates against someone who exposed a problem. The person who exposed it has allies. The allies react. The administrator responds. A year later, the entire department is in chaos, and the patient care is catastrophic, and everyone has forgotten that it started because someone wanted to punish someone else for embarrassing them. Grant made a sound, not a laugh, something smaller, a breath of recognition. Vincent looked at the ceiling. You want me to do nothing, he said. I want you to do something much harder than retaliation, Claire said. I want you to do something that actually ends it. The silence stretched, explained, Vincent said. She did. It took 40 minutes. She laid it out the way she laid out a treatment plan methodically, with the reasoning attached to each step, with the anticipated complications acknowledged, with the alternatives and why she was recommending against them. She had been thinking about it since the early morning hours in the medical room, since she'd watched the physician work and let her mind run the problem while her hands were still. The embezzlement records Grant had described were documented somewhere. The shell accounts had trails, or could have them reconstructed. The contact Doyle had made with the competing organizations had been made through communications phone probably, or in-person meetings that other people had witnessed. The plan to seize control had a timeline and a structure, which meant Doyle had communicated it to people, which meant there was a paper trail, or a witness trail, or both. If that information reached Doyle's own allies, before Doyle had a chance to manage the narrative, his support collapsed. Not through violence, through exposure. Through the particular destruction that came when people who had trusted you discovered the specific details of how you'd been using that trust, and the elements of Doyle's operation that were independent of his ambitions, the violent operations he'd been running on the side, the ones that had nothing to do with his conflict with Vincent. Those could go to federal investigators through an attorney, clean, documented, with enough insulation that it wasn't traceable to Vincent as a direct information source. Doyle would fall, publicly, without a war. His own people turn on him, Grant said slowly when she finished, before he can tell them we're coming. Before he can frame it as Vincent versus Raymond, Claire said, because it won't be. It'll be Raymond versus his own record. Vincent had said nothing for a long time. He was processing, she could see it, the particular quality of his stillness when his mind was moving faster than the room could see. The federal angle, he said. You're asking me to provide information to investigators. I'm asking you to provide information about Doyle's independent violent operations, she said carefully, through an attorney, which gives you legal protection for the disclosure and keeps your name out of any direct transaction. That's not how things are done in my world. I know, she said. That's exactly why it works. She held his gaze. Nobody expects it. That's the point. Doyle is prepared for force. He has contingencies for force. He doesn't have contingencies for you choosing something different. Grant, Vincent said. I think she's right, Grant said. And then, because he was Grant and he had spent 20 years being the man who said the true thing even when it cost him, he added, I'm tired of the other way, Vincent. I'm tired of what it costs, the men we bury, the families. The way it just keeps, he stopped. It just keeps going. And it never ends the way we say it will. Vincent looked at him. A long look, the look of two men who have known each other across a very long and very difficult road and are acknowledging, without saying it directly, that they have both arrived at the same place through different routes. Pull the financial records, Vincent said finally. All of them. Get Hartley on the phone. Hartley was the attorney. Claire had heard the name twice. Tonight, Grant nodded and left. Claire was quiet. You're surprised, Vincent said. A little, she admitted. Why? Because I was prepared to make the argument 4 more times. She paused. Usually when I present a treatment plan that changes the approach significantly, I have to make the case multiple times before it lands. I've been running the same machine for 15 years, he said. And it was the same phrase from the dark room. She recognized it immediately. You said the machine might be able to run differently. A pause. I want to find out if that's true. She looked at him for a moment. It's going to cost you, I know. Not just Doyle. The process of changing the structure of what you've built, it's going to cost you allies, time, exposure, and things you're not anticipating yet. It's not going to be clean. I know that too. He looked at the window. Change doesn't get to be clean. That's the part everyone wants to skip. She wrote something in her notebook. He watched her write it. What did you just write? He asked. That you said something true, she said. I write things down when they matter. The corner of his mouth moved. She was beginning to know that specific, almost expression had cataloged it the way she cataloged vitals as a real data point, something that meant something about the actual state of the system beneath the surface. At 3:48 that afternoon, the attorney called. She heard one side of the conversation, Vincent's side, from across the room, where she was reviewing the physician's notes from the morning. She wasn't trying to listen. She was trying not to listen. She managed about 60% of not listening. What she heard was Vincent Moretti instructing his attorney to document specific financial transactions across specific accounts over a specific 2-year period, to prepare a sealed disclosure for federal submission related to Doyle's independent violent operations, and to ensure that the financial records were structured for transmission to Doyle's own network through an intermediary that could not be traced to the Moretti organization. She heard him say at one point, when the attorney apparently raised an objection, I know what it looks like. Do it anyway. And then at the end, after a long pause where the attorney was clearly speaking, yes. All of them. Everything connected to his operations. Clean. He hung up. He looked at Claire. It's going to take 48 hours to prepare the documentation properly, he said. Does Doyle have 48 hours before he figures out the crew failed? 36, Vincent said. Maybe less. Then we need to make sure he stays uncertain for 36 hours. She thought for a moment. What would he expect to hear from you right now if the operation had succeeded? Vincent looked at her. Something moved through his expression, the recognition of someone watching another person think tactically for the first time and realizing that the person is good at it. Nothing, he said. If he'd succeeded, there'd be nothing from me. The silence would confirm it. So we give him silence, she said. We're already giving him silence. Then we keep giving it. She paused. What about his allies in your organization, the ones who are uncertain? The ones you said were positioning. What do they need to see right now? Stability, Vincent said. They need to see that the estate is functioning normally. Can you do a call? Not a meeting, a call. Something that sounds routine. Something that gets back to the right ears that things are not normal. Because nothing is normal but managed. He was quiet. He was looking at her with the full weight of his attention, which was, she had learned, a considerable thing to be on the receiving end of. You understand how this works, he said. I understand how organizations work under pressure, she said, and how people behave when they're uncertain. It's the same in a hospital. When something goes wrong, what the staff needs most is to see that someone is still at the wheel. She paused. Even if the person at the wheel is doing it from a bed with a healing gunshot wound. He made 3 calls over the next 2 hours. She stayed out of the room for those she'd learned which battles to be present for and which ones needed the space of his own domain. She went downstairs, sat in the kitchen, ate the soup that Ina put in front of her without comment, and thought about what she was going to say when the right moment came. Because there was still the part of this conversation she hadn't had with him yet. The part about what came after Doyle. At 6:22 in the evening, when the physician had come and gone, and the wound assessment had been cautiously positive, and the estate had settled into the particular operational hum of a place reorganizing itself after a crisis, Claire sat back down in the chair by the bed and said, I need to talk to you about something that isn't Doyle. Vincent looked at her. The legitimate side of your business, she said. The shipping, the construction, the property holdings. I've heard them referenced enough times to know they exist. And I've been thinking about what you said about wanting to find out if the machine can run differently. Those businesses are part of the machine. They don't have to be, she said. That's my point. She leaned forward. If the illegal operations that currently control the legitimate ones were separated structurally, legally, with proper documentation, those businesses could stand on their own. They could run clean. And the people employed by them could work without being inside what you currently have. He was quiet. That's not a small thing, he said. I know, it's years of restructuring, legal exposure, finagulatory scrutiny. Yes, she said. All of that, she paused. Is it impossible? He looked at her. And she saw him do the thing he'd done in the dark room. Hit the edge of practice language and find, on the other side of it, something he hadn't yet put into words. Impossible, he said slowly, is what I say when something would cost me control. She held his gaze. I know, a long silence. I'll need help, he said. Real help. Attorneys, accountants, people who know how to, he stopped. People I'd have to trust with information I don't show anyone. Grant, she said. You could start with Grant. He's tired of the other way. He told you that himself today. And he's the most competent person in this building. She paused. And whatever you need to do on the legal side, there are people who handle exactly this kind of transition. Attorneys who specialize in it. You'd have to be willing to accept some consequences for the parts of the history that can't be restructured away. You're telling me I'd have to face accountability. I'm telling you that's what making it real costs, she said. You can't buy a clean exit. You can earn one. Those are different things. He was quiet for what felt like a very long time. And you, he said, what are you going to do after this? It was the question she'd been expecting and the one she was least prepared for, which was unusual for her. She was almost always more prepared than she appeared. I'm going to go back to practicing medicine, she said, properly. The way I wanted to before the hospital made that impossible. How? She took a breath. The dismissal. The incident with the teenage patient. The attending physician who froze and then blamed me in the record. There are people who know what actually happened that night. The resident who was in the bay, the paramedics who brought the patient in, the patient himself, who is apparently alive and in college and has a very clear memory of what happened. She paused. I haven't gone after the record because I didn't have resources. I've been surviving. But surviving and actually living are different things. She looked at him. I need the record corrected, not for revenge. Because I need to practice medicine, and right now there is a false account in my professional file that prevents that. What do you need, he said. Help gathering the documentation, she said. Records, witness statements, the kind of legal support that finds the things that already exist and makes sure they're visible. She paused, not fabricated. I need what's true to be findable. I have people who find things, Vincent said. I know you do. She held his gaze. This has to be clean, Vincent. If anything that comes out of this review is manufactured or pressured, it destroys the whole case. I need the truth. Just the actual truth. The actual truth is usually enough, he said. If you know where to look. She nodded. There's something else, she said. Of course there is, he said, with a tone that was not quite exasperated and not quite fond, and was entirely characteristic of how he'd spoken to her since approximately day 2. If I go back to practicing, she said carefully, I want to do it in a way that's actually useful, not just returning to a system that will do to the next nurse what it did to me. She paused. There are people in Blackridge who can't access emergency care because they can't pay for it, who delay treatment until small problems become catastrophic ones, who don't call ambulances because they're afraid of the bill. She looked at the window. I want to build something for them. A clinic. Trauma-focused, uninsured, and underserved patients. Staffed by properly trained people with proper support. The room was quiet. That costs money, Vincent said. It costs significant money, she agreed. And I'm not asking you to give it to me. She looked at him directly. I'm asking you to help me structure it properly if you're willing to contribute to the funding. Independently governed, no ownership, no control, no access for you beyond what any donor has. She paused. Your name doesn't have to be on it, but your money directed properly could actually help people. He looked at her for a very long moment. You've been planning this, he said. I've been thinking about it, she said. There's a difference. Not in this case, he said. You came here with a plan. I came here starving and about to be evicted, she said. I came here because I had no choice. The plan developed because she stopped, because I stayed long enough to see what was possible. He held her gaze. She watched him work through it, the man who had spent 15 years making sure every transaction benefited his position, trying to understand a request that offered him no leverage, no control, no return beyond the abstract concept of useful. I have one condition, he said. She waited. You design the governance structure yourself, he said. I don't want any say in how it runs. If my money is in there, I don't want to be able to get it back or get it out. Set it up so I can't touch it once it's transferred. She stared at him. That's the condition, she said. That you have less control. Yes, he said. Because if I can reach it, I'll reach it. Eventually. For some reason that will seem good at the time. He held her gaze. I know how I work. Design it so I can't. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, including everything in the dark room. She picked up her pen. She opened her notebook to a clean page. All right, she said. Let's start. At 11:15 that night, Doyle's network collapsed. Not with violence, with paperwork. The financial documents, 3 years of embezzlement, redirected funds, payments to outside organizations reached Doyle's two most senior allies through channels that couldn't be traced to the Moretti organization. The men who received them spent 40 minutes making phone calls. By the time Doyle realized something was wrong, 4 of his 6 key supporters had already pulled back, and the remaining 2 were deciding. At 11:47, federal investigators received a sealed disclosure prepared by Hartley, documenting Doyle's independent violent operations. It was clean, sourced, and specific enough to generate immediate interest. At 12:03 in the morning, Raymond Doyle attempted to leave his house with 2 suitcases and a car parked around the block. Federal agents were already there. He was arrested on the sidewalk, in the dark, trying to reach a car that had been watched for 6 hours. He went without a fight. Doyle was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He could read a situation. He understood, in the moment the agents identified themselves, that the war he'd planned was already over, and he hadn't fired a shot. Grant told Vincent at 12:17. He stood in the doorway and delivered the information in the same flat, professional tone he delivered everything. And then he did something that Claire had not seen him do once in the entire week she'd been in this house. He smiled, small, brief, like a man who'd forgotten he knew how and was remembering. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then, anyone hurt? No one on our side, Grant said. His people? No contact. They stood down before we got there. The financial documents were enough. Vincent nodded. He looked at the window for a moment, the dark outside, the estate quiet around them, intact. Thank you, Grant, he said. Grant looked at him. The particular look of a man who has worked for someone for 20 years and has just heard them say something in a way they have never said it before. Yeah, Grant said. Of course, he left. Claire wrote the time in her notebook. She wrote Doyle arrested, no violence, method, documentation, and exposure. First time. She underlined first time. You're writing it down, Vincent said. It matters, she said. He looked at her across the room. The lamp between them made a small, warm island of light in the dark. He was thinner than when she'd arrived. He'd be thinner still before he was fully recovered. The scar forming on his shoulder would be permanent. She'd told him that directly, because she didn't tell him things that weren't true. My father would have hated this, he said. How you handled Doyle. All of it, he said, the whole week. A pause. He would have said I'd gone soft. You made a betrayal collapse without starting a war, Claire said. There's nothing soft about that. It's just a different kind of hard. He looked at her. You're very good at reframing things, he said. I'm good at seeing what's actually there, she said. Sometimes those are the same thing. At 2 in the morning, she finally closed her notebook. You should sleep, she said. You should sleep, he said. You've been awake for most of a week. I've had worse, she said. I know, he said. You told me about the Friday nights in the trauma bay. A pause. I remember everything you've told me. She looked at him. So do I, she said. And for a moment, in the quiet of the room that had been a battleground and a sick room and a negotiating table and a confessional and a place where 2 very different people had found, through the specific pressure of an impossible week, something that neither of them had a clean name for. In that quiet, they just looked at each other. The curtains were open. They were always open now. And outside, very slowly, the night began the process of becoming morning. The morning after Doyle's arrest, Vincent woke up and asked for coffee. Not water, not broth, coffee. Claire looked at him from across the room with the expression of a woman measuring whether this was a medical question or a human one, and decided it was both. Half a cup, she said. Black, and you eat something real with it. He didn't argue. That alone told her how much had changed. Ina brought coffee and toast at 7:43. And for the first time in the 10 days Claire had been inside the Moretti estate, Vincent Moretti sat up in bed without being helped, held a cup with his right hand, testing the shoulder carefully, feeling the limits of what the healing tissue would allow, and drank it like a man who had decided he intended to be alive for a while, and might as well behave accordingly. Claire sat across from him and drank her own coffee and said nothing, because some moments didn't need narration. The physician is coming at 10, she said eventually. I know. He's going to clear you for limited mobility. Supervised, no stairs alone for another 3 days. I heard you the first time, you heard me. You don't always listen. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. That almost expression again. She cataloged it as she always did and said nothing about it. The attorney called at 6, he said. Hartley. He says the federal process is moving. Doyle's network is cooperating faster than expected because they're trying to position themselves before the arraignment. He set the cup down. 3 of his former allies have already been in contact, wanting to know where things stand. What did you tell them? He said. I told Hartley to let them wait. A pause. Waiting is its own message. What message do you want to send? He thought about it. That the organization is stable. That what happened with Doyle was an anomaly, not a symptom. He paused. Is that true? It was a question she hadn't expected. Not because it was surprising by now, almost nothing. He said surprised her, but because of the way he asked it. Not rhetorically. Genuinely. The question of a man who wanted an honest answer more than he wanted a comfortable one. Partially, she said. The betrayal itself was Doyle. That's specific to him, his ambition, his calculation. But the conditions that let it develop for 2 years, the way information flows in your organization, the way loyalty is structured, the way people below a certain level never speak directly to you, those aren't Doyle. Those are the system. She paused. Anomalies don't grow for 2 years undetected in a healthy system. He was quiet for a long moment. You're telling me the organization has structural problems, he said. I'm telling you what you already know, she said. You've known it. That's why Doyle's visit scared you, not him specifically. But what his ability to get that close said about the gaps. He put the coffee cup down. He looked at his hands for a moment, something she'd seen him do, when he was processing something he didn't want to process, when the implications of a thing were landing in real time. Grant said the same thing, he said. 3 months ago. I told him to handle it. And did he? I didn't follow up, Vincent said. Flat. Direct. No excuse wrapped around it. She wrote something in her notebook. What did you write? He asked. That you acknowledged a leadership failure without being asked to, she said. I write things when they matter. He looked at her. The look had something complicated in it, the specific discomfort of a man who was accustomed to being observed, but not accustomed to being seen. You're going to be a problem, he said. I've been a problem since night 1, she said. You kept me anyway. At 10:15, the physician cleared Vincent for limited supervised mobility. He was professional, thorough, and diplomatically silent about the circumstances that had led to the wound's reopening. He was. Claire had decided, a man who understood the specific value of not asking questions he didn't need the answers to. She walked Vincent down the hallway for the first time. Slowly, his right arm in a proper sling, his left hand not touching the wall, even though she could see him wanting to the pride of a man who would rather fall than appear to need the support. She walked close enough to catch him if he needed it, and far enough to preserve the dignity. He made it to the end of the hallway and back. When they returned to the room, he sat on the edge of the bed and breathed for a moment with the specific quality of someone who has just accomplished something their body told them they shouldn't attempt yet and is working out whether the accomplishment was worth the cost. Good, Claire said. My legs work, he said. Your legs have always worked. Your cardiovascular system just needed to remember it's not in crisis anymore. She helped ease the sling back to the correct position. Twice a day. We add stairs at the end of the week. He looked at her hand, adjusting the sling. Where do you go when this is over? We already talked about this. We talked about the clinic, he said. I'm asking about you, your apartment, your life outside this house. She stepped back. She considered the way she considered most of his questions, taking it seriously, not performing the answer. I go back to my apartment. I start the process of getting the professional record corrected. I begin building the governance structure for the foundation. She paused. I figure out what normal looks like after this. Do you know what it looks like? Not exactly, she said. But I know what I want it to contain. She met his eyes. Work that matters, people I respect. A life I chose. She paused. In that order, he held her gaze. And this? What does this? He stopped. The edge of practiced language again. She was beginning to know that stop very well. What do you call this? I don't know yet, she said. It was the most honest answer she had, and she gave it without apology. I know what it isn't. It isn't me becoming part of your world. It isn't you having a claim on mine. It isn't simple, and I'm not interested in pretending it is. She paused. But I also know that what happened in this room over the last 10 days, I've never had anything like it. And I'm not in the habit of walking away from things I've never had before. Vincent looked at her for a long time. That's the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, he said. Would you prefer something less honest? No, he said. And the way he said it told her everything about how rarely he got honesty from anyone and how much it cost him when he didn't have it. 3 weeks later, the medical board convened, not because they'd been pressured, not because anyone had called anyone and made the kind of suggestion that arrived wrapped in consequence, because Hartley's team had located, through entirely legitimate documentary research, a set of facts that had always existed and had simply never been assembled in the same room before. The paramedic report from the night of the teenage patient's emergency. The resident's notes, time-stamped 2 minutes before the attending physician's account, began notes that didn't match the narrative the physician had later submitted. The patient himself, now 20, now a sophomore at a state university, who had written a letter unsolicited. Claire had not known about it until she was sitting in front of the board describing in specific detail what he remembered of the woman who had kept him alive when everyone else was still deciding who was responsible for deciding. He'd written, "She didn't ask permission. She just did what needed to be done. And I went home." The board reviewed everything for 4 hours. Claire sat outside the hearing room in a plastic chair with her hands in her lap and her notebook beside her in the particular stillness of someone who has done everything that can be done and is now at the exact point where the outcome leaves her hands. She thought about the 16-year-old she'd been trying to save. She thought about the attending physician's face when he'd looked at her across the bay afterward, not grateful, not ashamed, just calculating, already calculating. She thought about the dismissal letter and the legal fees and the gas station coffee and the peanut butter crackers and the rainy drive to an iron gate she'd almost not gone through. She thought about a dark room and a man's voice saying before anything different was possible. The board door opened at 2:17 in the afternoon. The review chair was a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of someone who had been in institutional medicine long enough to have seen every way a system could fail a person and had stopped pretending otherwise. She said, "Ms. Bennett, the board has completed its review." Claire stood. "The record of dismissal," the chair said, "will be formally amended to reflect that the clinical actions taken on the night in question were within acceptable emergency standards given the documented circumstances, and that the subsequent characterization of those actions in the institutional record was." She paused, with the specific pause of someone choosing the word that was accurate without being inflammatory, inconsistent with the documented evidence. Claire said nothing. She was doing the things she did in the trauma bay, in the dark room. In every high-pressure moment, she'd navigated holding the surface absolutely still while everything underneath ran its full range. "You are eligible to return to clinical practice," the chair said, "upon completion of updated certification requirements which, given your record, should take approximately 6 weeks. A pause. "For what it's worth, and I recognize institutional boards saying so, doesn't carry the weight it should. This should not have happened to you." Claire nodded. Her voice, when she found it, was steady. "Thank you," she said, "for looking." She walked out of the building alone, stood on the sidewalk in the November air, and let herself feel it, really feel it, without the clinical management she usually applied to her own emotional responses. The full weight of what the last year had cost her, and the specific lightness of watching part of it finally be named correctly. She cried for approximately 4 minutes, quietly, efficiently, the way she did most things. And then she wiped her face, picked up her phone, and called the one person she wanted to tell first. Grant answered. "Call him," she said. "Tell him I'm coming by." Grant laughed, a real one, brief and genuine. "He's been checking his phone every 20 minutes. Tell him to stop," she said. "I'll be there in 40. She was there in 35. Vincent was downstairs when she arrived, stairs approved, as of 4 days prior, in the room off the main hallway that he'd begun using as an office during the day. The command center bedroom had been reassigned. She'd told him in the second week that conducting business from a sick bed was reinforcing the wrong psychology, and he'd moved his operations downstairs with the particular air of a man pretending he'd already been planning to do that. He stood when she came in. He'd been doing that since the second week, too. She hadn't asked him to. He'd just started. She looked at him across the room. He looked back. He read her face the way he always read her face now, with the specific attention of someone who had learned that this particular person's expression told the truth, even when her words were measured. He said it went well. She said it went well. And then, because they were who they were, and the room was just the two of them, and the last 6 weeks had been the most concentrated education in another person's inner life that either of them had ever experienced, she crossed the room and he met her halfway, And for the very first time, he put his arms around her without needing a medical reason. His shoulder was still healing. She was careful with it. He held on anyway. You did it, he said. We found what was already there, she said. That's different. You always do that, he said. Do what? Give the credit to the facts, he said, as if the facts find themselves. She didn't answer that. She stood in the circle of his arms and let herself have the moment without immediately filing it, categorizing it, converting it into data. Just the moment. Just the specific warmth of a thing that had been earned through difficulty and was exactly what it appeared to be. Then she stepped back because she was Claire Bennett and she had an agenda. I've finished the governance structure, she said. He looked at her. For the foundation, she said. I want to go through it with you. Every clause. She pulled out her notebook. Starting with the board composition. He sat down. Of course you do. You agreed to every condition, she said. I'm making sure you understand every one of them before we sign anything. I understand them. You're going to understand them more thoroughly, she said, and opened to the page. They spent 2 hours on the document. She walked him through the independent board structure, the financial oversight mechanisms, the specific provisions that prevented any single donor, including him, from directing operational decisions or withdrawing funding once committed. He read everything. He asked 3 questions, all of them good ones, all of them coming from someone who understood organizational structure at a level that most people who hadn't built something from scratch could only approximate. At one point he said, this clause, the one that prevents board members from having any financial relationship with the founder, that excludes you from the board. I know, she said. You designed yourself out of governance. I designed everyone with a conflict of interest out of governance, she said, including me. I'm the medical director. It's a different role. He read the clause again. You thought about this carefully. I've been thinking about it since the first week, she said. When I was sitting in that chair watching you try not to die and thinking about what I would do when you stopped trying to die. She paused. I had a lot of quiet hours. He looked at her. You were planning the clinic while you were keeping me alive. I was doing both, she said. I'm a good multitasker. Something crossed his face, that thing she didn't have a name for. That wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite something else. That was specific to him, and that she had come to understand as the expression of a man allowing himself to be surprised by something in a way he didn't immediately need to control. He signed where she indicated. She signed where she indicated. Hartley, joining by phone, notarized the relevant sections remotely and confirmed the trust documentation would be filed by end of week. The Bennett Emergency Care Foundation existed on paper at 3:41 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in November. Claire put the pen down. She looked at the signature page. Thank you, she said. I haven't done anything yet, he said. You signed it, so I own it, she said. For you, that's enormous. He was quiet. Then yes, he said. It is. The opening of the clinic happened 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in early January, when the cold had settled into Blackridge for real, and the kind of people who needed a place to go for emergency care without worrying about the bill were exactly the kind of people who felt that cold most acutely. The building was a former community center, leased through the foundation at a below-market rate, negotiated by an attorney who was very good at finding favorable terms. Claire had painted 2 of the rooms herself. The other nurses, 4 of them, all experienced, all with histories of being pushed out of systems that should have protected them, had set up the supply rooms with the particular affection of people who were finally being trusted with their own competence. The reception area was clean and warm and did not look like a place where people were made to feel ashamed of needing help. There were 12 people waiting when they opened the doors. Claire checked the first patient herself. A woman in her 70s with a wound on her left hand that had been wrapped in a kitchen towel for 3 days because she didn't want to deal with the emergency room billing. Simple cleaning, proper dressing, antibiotics. 15 minutes. The woman said thank you 4 times. Claire said once is enough. By noon, they had seen 19 patients. By closing, 31. She stood in the reception area at 6:15 after the last patient left, looking at the numbers her intake nurse had written on the whiteboard, 31 patients. 0 turned away and felt something she recognized from the best nights in the trauma bay. Not the adrenaline. The thing underneath the adrenaline. The solid, grounded sense of having been exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was built to do, with nothing wasted and nothing held back. She heard the door. She turned around. Vincent was at the back of the room. He'd come in quietly, which was not difficult for him. He had the particular quality of someone who had spent a lifetime choosing exactly how present he wanted to appear and could calibrate it precisely. He was in a dark coat, his arm no longer in a sling, the shoulder healing enough now that the careful way he held it was more habit than necessity. He looked at the whiteboard. He looked at the room. He looked at her. 31, she said. I saw, he said. We were told to expect 15 the first week, she said. Across all 5 days. You beat the projection on the first day, he said. That doesn't surprise me. She looked at him. You're at the back of the room. It's your event, your clinic, your night. You helped make it possible. Lots of things helped make it possible, he said, including you being willing to stay in a chair for 10 days next to a man who threw a book at your head. She walked toward him. He stayed where he was at the back, not claiming the room, not filling it with his particular gravity, the way she'd seen him do in every other context. Just present, just there, in the way of someone who had learned, at some cost, the difference between occupying a space and belonging in it. She stopped in front of him. Why did you stay at the back? She asked. Because you needed this to be yours, he said. Not mine, not connected to me, yours. She looked at him for a moment. Then how is the restructuring going? Slowly, he said, and correctly. Those two things are apparently related. He paused. 3 operations formally closed this week. The shipping company's new compliance structure was approved by the attorney. Grant hired 2 people. A beat. It costs more than I expected and takes longer than I expected. That's what real work does, she said. Yes, he said. I'm learning that. She looked at the whiteboard one more time. 31 people. 31 people who went home with clean wounds and proper medication, and the particular dignity of having been treated like their lives mattered without someone handing them a bill at the door. I want to ask you something, Vincent said. She looked back at him. Outside, he said. It's been a long day. Walk with me. They walked outside. The January cold was real and immediate. She pulled her coat tighter. He stood beside her and looked at the street, the ordinary nighttime street of a mid-sized Pennsylvania city, the lights and the traffic and the unremarkable bustle of people living their unremarkable lives. I want to ask you something I should have asked earlier, he said. Before contracts and foundations and governance structures. He looked at her. Do you trust me? She thought about it. She gave it the genuine consideration it deserved, the way she gave everything, including hard questions, the full weight of her attention. I trust that you're trying, she said. I trust that the trying is real and not strategic. I trust that when you make a commitment to me directly, you keep it. She paused. That's more trust than I give most people. Is it enough, he said. For what? For whatever this is, he said. And for once, he didn't stop at the edge of the language. He let the question be as large as it was. I don't want to own you. I know what that looks like. I've spent a lifetime operating in a world where everything either belonged to me or was a threat. And I understand now that the thing I want most is the one thing that doesn't work that way. He paused. I want you to choose this freely, knowing everything you know. She looked at him, this man, who had thrown a book at her head, who had grabbed her wrist and then released it, who had let her force him into a contract and consented to breathing exercises in the dark and told her about his father and the currency of fear and signed away control of a significant amount of money because she'd asked him to. This man who had sent Doyle to prison with paperwork instead of blood and was slowly, painfully, at real cost, trying to become something different from what he'd been built to be. She thought about the dark room before anything different was possible. She thought about the morning after. Ask me in the morning. I'm not going to be easy, she said. I know that, he said. I'm going to disagree with you frequently and loudly. And I'm going to be right approximately 60% of the time, and I'm going to push you to prove it either way. I know that too, he said. And I'm not moving in, she said. I have my own apartment, my own work, my own life. This runs alongside those things, or it doesn't run. I know, he said. I'd have it no other way. You inside my walls, dependent on my walls, that's not what I want. I want you to have every door open. He held her gaze. I want you to stay because you want to stay, not because you need to. She thought about the thing he'd said on the night everything came apart, in the dark, when she'd asked him what he was afraid of. That it ends before anything different was possible. Something different was possible. She was standing in front of 31 people's worth of proof. Then yes, she said, it's enough. He reached out and took her hand. Not with the grip he'd used on her wrist on the first night, not the grip of a man asserting control. Just a hand holding hers in the cold, outside a clinic that hadn't existed 2 months ago. You're going to tell me when I get it wrong, he said. Every time, she said. And you'll stay. As long as the door stays open, she said. Yes. He looked at her. The streetlight put a particular light on his face, the permanent scar along his shoulder hidden by his coat, the lines that the last 2 months had added around his eyes, the specific expression of a man standing outside the territory he'd spent 15 years building and finding to his surprise that the outside was not what he'd always been told it was. "You know what the worst part of this whole thing is," he said. "What?" "I almost threw you out on the first night," he said. "You opened the curtains and I almost threw you out." "I know," she said. "I saw you consider it. What stopped you?" he asked. "Genuinely, what made you stay?" She thought about it. The honest answer, not the easy one. "You called me by my name," she said. "Before you went to sleep. You've been calling me Bennett for hours. And then right before you closed your eyes, you," said Claire, like it had slipped out. She paused. "People who are completely unreachable don't do that." He was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know I did that," he said. "I know you didn't," she said. They stood outside the clinic in the cold January night, two people who had arrived at the same place through this specific and unlikely road of crisis and honesty, and the refusal on both sides to be less than what they actually were. 31 people had walked through that door today and received care. More would come tomorrow. The governance structure was signed, the trust was filed, and nobody could take it from her, not a negligent administrator, not a frozen physician, not a legal team protecting a hospital's reputation, not a man with a great deal of money and an old habit of ownership. It was hers, built on solid ground, built correctly. And the man standing beside her had chosen, for the first time in 15 years, to put something real and permanent beyond his own reach, and had done it willingly, as the first gift he'd ever given without keeping a hand on the door. That night, Claire Bennett drove home in a car that ran properly now, to an apartment that was hers, with a professional record that told the truth about who she was. She made tea. She opened her notebook. She wrote the date and the number 31 and one more line. This is what it looks like when something is built right. She closed the notebook. She slept. And in the morning, she went back to work because she was a trauma nurse, and there were people who needed her, and she had never once in her life needed to be told twice what her purpose was. She had only ever needed to be given the room to fulfill it, and now she had built the room herself. That was enough. That was everything. That was exactly what she had always been worth.